What's up, guys? So we just got back from King of Hillsboro a couple days ago. I wanted to kind of make a recap video to talk about from my point of view of tuning Jake's car, the red car. What I was looking at as we went between rounds, or between, from the first couple tests to to the next couple rounds. What I was looking at, the changes I was making, and maybe show you some video and kind of so you can see how the changes affected the car. I'll preference this with the fact that obviously I'm not an expert, and every time I go to the track I learn something, and so maybe something I say in here might actually be bad advice, but I just kind of wanted to put it out there so you can kind of see what we went through and how it went. Okay, so the first video you've already watched is the first test pass. I won't tell any times, not that I really care about you guys knowing when it runs. I'd just be more worried about other people maybe being upset if we ran next to them and they really cared what people knew what their time was. So I won't say times, but I just want to preference from the first test run to our last run. We ended up picking up 0.3 of ET. So this first test pass, which we made in the left lane, which is typically is the better lane out of the two. On the morning of, they felt pretty much the same. To me anyways, when I was walking them, I think maybe the rubber carries a little bit farther in the left lane, but they felt pretty apples to apples. So in the left lane, I felt pretty good. And it ended up being obviously our slowest pass of the day, and it was 0.3 slower than our fastest pass. When I first went up and looked at the track, kind of one of the tunes I was building off from was at that track, but with a tiny bit of glue down, just enough where you could feel it's hit, like someone spilled some soda on the floor and you had a little tack underneath your foot, just the tiniest bit. But when I went up there to check out the track that day, there was no tack at all. It was almost like standing on concrete. You could rub your foot in the rubber and you feel there's a little bit of bite there, but there was no tack to it at all. So a couple of things I look at in this first video. So obviously we're in the left lane. The biggest thing that I typically look at first is going to be the rear tire. I want to see not necessarily the tire itself, but I want to see how the suspension is working. So I'm looking at that tire gap, and I'm looking to see how much did it drive the rear end into the ground, how much fender gap did we gain, and then did it hold that fender gap between the tire and the fender, or did the body settle back down? After that, I start looking at the front end, which is the other part of the suspension equation. I'm looking to make sure it comes up slow-ish. Unfortunately, right now on these shocks, we are on full tight on the front. That tells you one of two things. I could tell you that the shocks, just one, they don't have enough travel, which is true for what we're trying to do. Two, it could tell you maybe the valving's not quite right, but I really think it comes down to the spring rate that we have on there. We've got probably too long and not stiff enough spring, so it compresses it, and it stores all of that energy when it's all compressed down to get the right height you want. And right when you let go of the button, it's releasing all of that energy, which causes the front end to come up very quickly, snaps up. If we put a shorter, stiffer spring on there, the valve in the shock would probably be able to control it, and we wouldn't have those kind of problems. So after we establish that the front end it's kind of coming up a little bit too fast, and we get over that, we can move on to something else. But one thing I will note is that even though it's coming up fast, it doesn't look like it hits the top and then all of a sudden we gain wheel speed, as if it maxes it out and then unloads the whole suspension, causing wheel speed. That's the next thing we'll look at. We're going to look at wheel speed and try to figure out where we started to gain. So if you scrub through the video really slowly, especially with those new Hoosier tires and having those Hoosier white letters, you can really see when the tires start to become blurred, you can kind of watch the tire pick up speed as it goes. So as I scrub through the first race, I can kind of see that it wasn't but a couple feet out and we started to gain some wheel speed, probably a little bit more. I almost like the tire had to get right about to the starting line, so we got about a whole car out, and we all of a sudden had some wheel speed. So in Jake's car's tune-up, I can show you what I was trying to do to combat the wheel speed. So in advanced tables, it's in a 1D. Nope, I apologize. That's not where it's at. Timing, launch retards. So you can kind of see right in here what I was doing for launch retard. So I didn't start pulling timing until 0.2 of a second. And then I make this next point, 0.21. So right after I want there to be even though it looks like there's a gradual slope here, I want, realistically, it pulls 6 degrees like that. And part of the reason why I do that is because, you know, there's people on the internet that said you really want that car to see it right then, that it's getting all that timing yanked out of it, all the power is gone. I wait 0.2 because if you look in the log from the time you let go of the button till the time, typically in our drive shaft data, you'll see a slope up where you watch the tire load up. You have really quick acceleration in the drive shaft data, and then it comes down a little bit, and then it starts to take off again. Typically, I believe that down again is when it stops loading up. It starts to hook up, and it starts to accelerate the car forward. So you'll have a dip in drive shaft speed over time, and then it starts to take off. So I look at that. I want it to load the tire up. I want to drive the rear end of the ground, load the tire up, and then I'm going to yank the timing out of it. So you can see here that it looks like I had it all back in by 0.8. So I only pulled timing 6 degrees out for 0.6 of a second, and then I had a gradual slope out the back for about 0.3 of a second to bring it all back in. But what I noticed, especially looking at drive shaft data versus front wheel speed data, this is the first race we ever had front wheel speed data, and it looks like we gotta do some things to clean up the actual signal. It's a little bit like spiky and all over the place, but you can kind of tell right about 0.8 where all that timing was coming back in. You can see the drive shaft data start to diverge away from wheel speed data, and that tells me we were starting to pick up wheel speed. So even though I ran a pretty decent 60 foot, kind of our normal 60 foot, I realized that there was probably ground to be made up there, because if you can't get it to stick the tire early, typically out the back, even though you're not waste spoking it, you've got wheel speed, and that causes issues. The second video you watched is our second test pass. It's in the left lane again. We wanted to keep some consistency, and I wanted to try do some stuff with the tune to try to get the wheel speed under control. What you might not have seen is that when we went up to do our second test pass, when Jake did his initial burnout, he didn't do a hot enough burnout. It came out of it, and there must have been a little bit of water that was trailing up anyways, and I could see that there was water on the tire. I told him to come back, get back into the water, and we're going to try to do another one, and the exact same thing happened. And by then, you know, they were waving us in, and we're not going to do more than 2 burnouts. So he gets up there. You can see in the video, let's go to the button, and it's almost instant wheel speed. It didn't matter how much timing I was pulling. It was instant, and the run was pretty well scrapped. Surprisingly though, even though our 60 foot was garbage, I put more power in it out the back, and it actually did pick up a little bit of ET. Okay, so the third video you just watched is actually a round 1. We're racing a guy named Cole. and by all rights, it's a very large turbo LS methanol combination in a relatively street style car. I think that in past years anyways, he would have had us dead to rights. We typically couldn't keep up with this guy. He was having some issues getting it to build boost on the line. We don't know if it was kind of his turbo going out, but we said we'll let you lay into it, we'll let you get in before we really start making boost. But we were doing our best to kind of do it at just the right time where we're not burning him down, because he's already going to be on the brake long enough. But we're also, making sure we build boost and get in. So you watch this video. My round one, I knew that we're going to the right lane. Typically the right hand lane is worse, as we talked about the left hand lane typically being better before. So what I ended up doing was I kept the boost curve essentially the same as far as starting line boost and launch trans brake boost and 60-foot boost was all very similar. The difference is that I looked at his log, and I could kind of gauge based, off of time when we were grabbing high gear. And what I ended up doing is right when we were grabbing high gear, I poured the boost to it. My graph goes from kind of nice and smooth. It goes to this where it's much, a large jump and you can see kind of a straight line. But that ended up being about 0.2 of a second after the gear change, or what I estimated to be the gear change. So when he grabbed high, essentially when you're piling that boost into it, it's probably going to take it. It's going to load that engine now. It's going to start making some power. And I also sprinkled a little bit more boost out the back. But the thing that I think really made the difference is in the launch retard. So I pulled the same 6 degrees out 0.2 in after letting go of the button. I saw from the first test pass that we made that worked. Obviously it loaded the tire, it stuck it, and it kept, planted or minimal to no wheel speed until it got to the point where it was starting to pour that timing back into it. And I drug that out almost to, I drug out the 6 degrees quite a ways, and then I started tapering it off almost to about what we'd be in the 60-foot. And if you scrub through that video, you can really see how, after we let go of the brake, it goes. The other indication is, if you really watch, is that fender gap, which I said I normally look at first to kind of see how it plants that tire. You can see that it drives the tire in, and then the car starts to actually squat. So the suspension is the exact same in an arguably worse lane. And what that tells me is that shock on that setting, based on how the car is accelerating, is not able to control the weight transfer of the vehicle. So it's actually squatting down on the tire. It's not necessarily separating down track, but you can definitely see there's less gap. That tells me that we should have probably put a click or two into the shock, but that also tells me that it is accelerating a lot harder. At least that's what I would assume is happening, is it's accelerating a lot harder. And if you watch the letters on the tire, you can tell that it does not pick up the wheel speed out the back, and I say out the back, I mean literally out past the starting line. We on our first test pass, we were picking up wheel speed right when the rear tire was getting to about the starting line. In this one, it's hard to tell where it starts to pick up the wheel speed, because it just kind of looks like natural acceleration. You don't see this all of a sudden, this jump where the car is not moving as faster, but the wheels are all of a sudden spinning faster. So I really felt like this worked, and it did. We ended up going 0.2 faster than our first test pass, which I would say is an exceptional jump. I don't remember what we picked up in the 60-foot, but we definitely picked up. But the 0.2 faster in ET made a big difference, and we picked up several mile an hour. One was pouring the power to a faster, quicker out the back right after the gear change, but two was getting it through the 60-foot and keeping that tire planted. And luckily on that run, Cole just didn't have enough to catch us. So the last video you watched here is round 2, where eventually, you can see, actually it's kind of a short video, you probably can't see the end, but we lose to the Nightmare car, which is a car that we've lost to last year at King of Hillsboro. One thing I'll say is that we only lost to the Nightmare car. It's hard to say. I didn't see any finish line footage. Jake says it's, a car or something like that, but I can tell you from last year, we had some in-car footage, and that car put lengths on us. I mean, 3-4 cars. We were starting to talk about buses. I don't know if I'm sure he didn't get slower this year. In fact, it kind of looked like he was more set up to do the Hillsboro style racing, not the ice racing. So we ended up doing a lot better this year against him, but couple of things I did in the tune. So you can see that I ended up going up 2 psi on the launch, and I obviously moved it all up to the 60 foot. I ended up moving up where I suspected the gear change to be even farther. I ended up adding 2 psi of dome pressure out the back, and I brought it in even more aggressively because I knew that this Nightmare car, from watching passes, it was probably one of the fastest, if it wasn't the fastest that day, making passes. Maybe it was just because of how smooth it looked, but he'd get to about just out of the 60 foot, and he would pour the nitrous to it like you wouldn't believe. And you can kind of see that in our run, where he looks like a dog. I mean, we're out 60 foot in him. He's like a big block, twin 4500 Dominators, whatever those carburetors are, and he would just pour it to the nitrous. I mean, we out 60 footed him. Normally in a nitrous car you wouldn't see that. So you can see we poured it to him, and then did I do anything with the launch retard? It looks like I pulled it out even farther. So I pulled another 1/2 degree of timing, because I figured I'd put 2 more pounds of boost in on the leave. So that's a good amount of horsepower, and I said I'll just pull another 1/2 degree out just to try to get it to stick. And then I actually tapered it out a little bit farther, to the point where the tapering was done probably just slightly after our 60 foot time. So if you watch the video, the thing that I forgot to do was I forgot to tell Jake to put another click or 2 into the shocks, into the compression side, to keep the car from actually squatting, because the tire was driving out, but when it started to weight transfer, it was still squat. So if you watch that video, you can actually see that looks very similar. The other thing, you can notice that our wheel speed is in pretty good check. Looks like maybe after the 60 foot we really start to pick up some wheel speed. So it's maybe not quite as good as the first round, but we did end up going a whole nother 1/10 faster to our best time of the day, which we were really happy with. We were really happy with, on that surface, how the car came around and how we were able to get it down the track. So unfortunately we did not win. We didn't necessarily come close to winning. Like I said, we lost the Nightmare car. He ended up going to the finals against Tim, and Tim won. But I'd say overall it was a great experience, and we learned a lot this time out. This was really the first time I was able to play with actually pulling the timing on the line, launch retard, and it was really working. I felt like we were getting down way better than we had in the past, and it was also our first time on Hoosier tires. But I say the Hoosiers probably helped, but I really think that without that launch retard, we would have had just as much wheel speed as we did with the Mickeys. So as far as the car, Jake's already started to tear it apart. We got some decent sized upgrades coming, and we got a lot of things to fix. We were fighting exhaust leaks with that On3 turbo kit, and we're going to be kind of fixing some of those things, and hopefully that helps us build boost quicker and make it more repeatable out the back. So I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe, and if you did find something helpful, or if you got more questions, make sure you comment down below, or if you or if you feel like this was worthwhile, do a like, and I'll try to do maybe more videos like this, especially next year when we get into it. As far as other news besides the red car, is that you'll probably start seeing a lot more videos of this car, which is, I don't know why my computer keeps doing that, it's super annoying, which is affectionately called Black Licorice. So I've got more videos to post on that as far as how far I've come right now, and then this winter is when I'm hoping to make it truly competitive. So make sure you guys stay tuned. Bye now.